How to memorize the 40 processes of the PMBOK 8th edition, not by random memorization, but through logic, reasoning and pattern, so that you are able to apply the same whilst solving scenario-based questions in your PMP exam. Let's get started. So as you might be aware, over PMBOK 6th and the PMBOK 7th editions, PMI had always advocated for 49 processes overall across the 5 domains. However, with the updated and simplified version of the PMBOK 8th edition, PMI has actually reduced the number of processes from 49 to 40, which is actually quite good because firstly, yes, it is 9 processes less to remember, and secondly and most importantly, these 40 processes now follow a very nice pattern and logic behind them, which we are going to learn now as part of this video, that makes it very easy for you to understand, memorize, and then apply the same whilst solving scenario and case study based questions for your PMP exam. So before we get started, if you are preparing for your PMP exam, I have a host of highly rated online courses on Udemy, starting from full 35 PDO trainings to mock simulators to the basics of project management available for you. The links will be in the description section in case you wish to be a part of my Udemy student community. Let's get started.
Right, so this is your table 2.1 from your PMBOK guide 8th edition, okay? And you'll be able to find this chart within section 2 of your PMBOK 8th edition. And this is basically the 40 process group chart, which sort of we are talking about, right? So let's try to first break down this chart with respect to its headers, okay? So if you see the headers here, you have the 5 focus areas, okay? So which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And over PMBOK 6th edition and 7th edition, these were actually called domains, okay? But now they are called focus areas, which is fine. Now this is where sequencing becomes a bit important because of course it is very intuitive as well. You need to know that the first process is initiation, after that you have planning, after that you have execution, after that you have monitoring and controlling, and finally it moves on to closing. Okay, so at least you need to remember the sequence that the key 5 phases of the project starts with initiating, moves on to planning, then executing, then monitoring and controlling, and finally close out. Okay, so if you look at the chart from a horizontal axis, yes, that is a sequence that needs to be sort of understood before you even move further down the chart. Now, if you look at the vertical axis, right, which is here, so you have governance, you have scope, schedule, finance, stakeholders, resources, and risk. Okay. Now, the good part about this is these sort of performance domains do not follow a sequence. Okay, so for example, it's not like that you first have to do governance and then you have to do scope and then you have to do schedule and then you have to do finance. It's not like that. Okay, and that is quite intuitive as well. So if you look at the initiating process group, so you are firstly initiating the project or phase, and then you are sort of identifying the stakeholders. So basically there is no scope, no schedule, or no finance activities as part of this initiating process. Okay, so to summarize, the vertical axis, which is your governance, scope, schedule, finance, stakeholders, resources, and risk, do not follow a sequence. So it can be used interchangeably. So that is something which is one less thing to memorize. Okay, so if some of you might be trying to memorize that first is governance, next is scope, it's not like that. Okay, so secondly, you need to understand that. Now going into the individual elements, or let's say if we talk about governance or if we talk about scope or let's say schedule, let's first understand what is the best process to memorize or sort of learn these individual tasks within these performance domains. Okay. Now to do that, first you need to understand this concept called PDCA, right? I hope many of you know this. So basically you plan it and then you do it and then you check it and then you act upon it. This is basically called the Deming cycle, and often in management terminology, PDCA is a very common term that is used. However, for the sake of this discussion, you just remember that anything starts with first planning and then you have to sort of manage it, right? And then finally, you sort of monitor and control it MNC, monitor and control. So basically, if you look at planning, yes, that stays the same as the PDCA. Doing is basically managing here, and checking and acting is basically monitoring and controlling. Okay, so if you have to remember another sequence as part of this chart, it will be that you plan first, then you manage, and then you monitor and control. Okay. Now, if you understand that, this chart becomes very simple, okay? Because if you look at the elements of, let's say, schedule, okay? Let's look at schedule first. So in schedule, what you are doing, you are planning the schedule management, you are developing the schedule, which is also sort of coming as planning. Of course, you are managing it, but there is sort of no process defined here. And then you monitor and control it. So plan, manage, monitor and control. So that is your schedule thing. So you plan the schedule, you develop the schedule, and you monitor and control your schedule. Plain and simple, right? There is not much memorization here. Okay. Let's look about finance. Finance is also quite similar. So you plan finances. Okay. So again, plan. You have to estimate your costs to develop the budget, because if you don't estimate your costs, think about it, how will we be able to develop the budget, right? So for example, if you are doing a construction work, you need to first understand and estimate how much it will cost you, right? And that will help you to develop the budget, because if you are not able to estimate the costs, there is no way you'll be able to develop a budget. So that is quite intuitive, right? However, as part of this plan, manage and monitor and control, yes, you plan your finances, you manage it, which is sort of you estimate your costs and develop budget, and then again you monitor and control. So this is quite easy as well. So schedule, finance, so both of them falls in the same sort of theme, that you plan schedule, plan finance, manage schedule, manage finance, and monitor and control it. Okay, so quite easy to remember as well, right? So next, if you move on to the stakeholders domain, you will be able to see a very interesting thing, that so what PMI has done is this time they have actually put stakeholder and communication in a single block. Okay, doesn't matter as long as you understand what the process actually is. So in the PMBOK 7th edition, there was this communication block here as well, which is now they have done away with, and it is basically a part of stakeholder. Doesn't matter. Let's look at communications first. Similarly, it's quite simple to understand. So you plan your communication, okay? You manage your communication, you monitor your communication. So it is again following this same structure: plan, manage, and monitor. Similarly, for stakeholders, it is quite intuitive that you have first the identification of stakeholders and then you manage them, right? Because first you have to identify the stakeholders and understand who to manage before you go ahead and even think about managing them, okay? So identifying the stakeholders, planning stakeholder engagement. So plan, manage stakeholder engagement, monitor. Okay. Similarly, so identify, one extra step, plan, manage, monitor and control. Okay. Very easy. So we have covered schedule, follows the same pattern: plan, manage, monitor and control. We have covered finance, follows the same pattern: plan, manage and control. We have covered stakeholders, follows the same pattern with one extra step, which is to identify the stakeholders, and then it's plan, manage, control. Communication follows the exact same pattern: plan, manage, and control. Okay. Now that leaves us with governance, which is right here, which we will learn in a second. That leaves us with scope, and that also leaves us with resources and risk. Okay. Now, if you look at resources, it is also quite similar to plan, manage, and monitor and control, right? So for example, let's learn this. Okay. So you plan resource management, right? And then you estimate your resources, similar to sort of finance, where if you remember, you sort of planned finances first and then you estimated your costs. Similarly, you plan your resource management first and then you estimate your resources. In terms of actually managing resources, it is also very intuitive. How do you manage them? You need to acquire the resources and you need to lead the team. Okay, so that's how overall management of resources or team members comes, right? And then it is monitoring and controlling. So if you think about resources as well, it is following that same pattern of schedule, finance, stakeholders, and communication, that you plan the resources, you estimate your resources, you acquire your resources and leading the team, and that together calls as managing the resources, and then you monitor and control the resources as well. And that is what the plain simple way of sort of memorizing this, that anything follows the plan, manage, and monitor and control steps. Okay. Now let's look at risk whilst we are here. Okay. Now risk is a bit interesting because it has a bit more breakdown to that plan, manage, and monitor and control. Okay. So if you look at risk, of course, you plan risk management, right? So the plan step remains. Next, you identify your risks, then you perform your risk analysis. And that way, if you remember in the PMBOK 7th edition, they had something called as qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis as well. Okay, there were like two buckets, but they have combined it in a single element, which is perform risk analysis as part of this table, which is fine. Then you plan risk responses, then you implement your risk responses as part of management, and then you monitor the risks. And if you think about it, it is also quite intuitive as well. However, it's a bit difficult than schedule, finance, or stakeholders. So let's say learn with me that first what I have to do as a project manager, I have to plan my risk management, right? Then I have to sort of identify risks. Okay, intuitively, yes, when you are in the planning stage of a project, you have to identify your risks, right? Now, logically, think about it. If you have identified 10 risks, all the 10 risks will not follow the same risk profile, right? So you might have 5 risks which are high, 3 risks which are medium, and let's say 2 risks which are low. Okay. So this is high, this is medium, and this is low. Now, how do you do this categorization? You basically perform risk analysis, right? So once you have identified these 10 risks, you perform risk analysis, which is either a quantitative risk analysis or a qualitative risk analysis, and that helps you to categorize these risks as high, medium, and low. What is the next obvious step after risk planning? You plan your responses, right? So for example, if these 5 risks occur, what will you do? What are your steps or what are your plans? Okay. So you plan your risk responses. You move on to execution, you implement your risk responses, and you keep on monitoring and controlling it. So it is very intuitive as well, guys, right? So in risks, you start with planning, then you identify your risks, which are, let's say, these 10 risks. Then you categorize your risks in high, medium, low. How do you do it? You perform risk analysis, either qualitative or quantitative. Plan your risk responses after that, because each of these risks will have some planning in terms of what you will do if they occur, right? Because at this point in time, those are all theory. Okay, it has not happened actually, and that's why the project is in planning. Now, when the project moves into execution, you implement your risk responses, very intuitive, and then you monitor and control it, as simple as that. Okay, hopefully we have covered risk, and now let's move on to scope. Scope is also quite intuitive, okay, and follows a very strong logic. So firstly, the plan step, which we learned here, stays the same here, okay? So you plan scope management. And next, you understand what needs to be delivered, right? In the previous PMBOK editions, this was called collect requirements, okay? And here in PMBOK 8th edition, it says elicit and analyze requirements, but it's the same. So you plan your scope management, then you collect the requirements, and then you sort of define the scope and you develop scope structure. And this is basically where you create your WBS. Okay, so you develop your scope structure. So quite intuitive. So you plan scope, okay, what you need to do and how you want to do it, okay, and what is your plan. Next, you collect the requirements. What should be the features? If there is a bridge, what are the elements of the bridge? If there is a product, what is that element or the features of the product? Okay, and that helps you to write the scope statement, okay, where you define the scope. And then you go ahead and develop the scope structure, which is your work breakdown structure. Typically, sometimes it can be your product breakdown structure as well. And then there is nothing in execution. You move on to monitor scope and validate scope. And that is basically the monitor and controlling part of scope management, that you monitor and then you validate. And if there is a fail in validation, you redo the scope or sort of fix it, right? And so that's how scope management is actually sort of learned in the PMBOK 8th edition way. Again, let's do a revision. So in scope, what we first do, very intuitive, there is first planning of the scope, right? Now, once you have done the planning of the scope, you have to collect the requirements, understand what needs to be delivered, right? So here comes the step, elicit and analyze requirements. Then you write that piece of paper which needs to be signed by your sponsor, okay? And that is where the defined scope comes. And then finally, you develop the scope structure, which is the WBS. And that's the 4-step process. Very intuitive, very logical, right? And finally, you monitor and control the scope, and then you validate the scope as well. Because after scope validation, then only the customer can actually accept what you have delivered. As simple as that. Because if that scope is not validated, the customer will not be accepting what you have delivered. So that's what scope would be all about.
Right, so before we move on, if you are preparing for your PMP exam, I'd recommend that you check out my online self-paced courses on Udemy. Starting from the full 35 PDU training for the PMP exam, to solving PMP style mock questions, to understanding the basics of project management, to learning the most advanced concepts in project management such as earned value management. I have courses for aspirants at every level of their project management career and journey. All the courses are very highly rated and many students have passed their exams with the help of my courses. The reviews speak for themselves. So if you're interested to join, all the links will be provided in the description section of this video. And now let's go back to the main video.
And finally, let's talk about governance, the only bit that is remaining as part of this entire 40 processes. So in governance, first you initiate the project, okay? You integrate and align project plans. So this was basically called project planning, okay? And if you have heard about this term called project initiation documentation or PID, this is actually the project management plan where actually you are integrating and aligning the project plans, okay? You plan the sourcing strategy here, which is your procurement strategy. Just keep in mind that you have to have a procurement strategy as part of your overall planning, right? Because without procurement, there is basically no project. Executing, manage project execution, manage quality assurance, manage project knowledge. Okay. Now, in terms of project execution, here you actually execute what you have planned. Very simple. Quality assurance, here it is linked to governance because quality is overall a governance part because it is quite fundamental and quite, let's say, foundational in terms of your overall project delivery. So you manage your quality, you manage project knowledge as well, which is your lessons learned. Okay. And in the monitoring and controlling, this is where your change management comes, right? Perform integrated change control. Okay. And this is where sort of you monitor and control the project performance, assess and implement the changes. So this is basically your perform integrated change control loop. And here is where you assess and implement the changes. Monitoring and controlling project performance is basically to understand whether the project is performing as part of your KPI or not. So for example, you might have a schedule KPI, might have a cost KPI, basically to sort of have a dashboard which will say that yes, if your project is running successfully or not. And this is the monitoring and controlling of your project overall. And of course, if there is a change, okay, you need to integrate and sort of manage it through the perform integrated change control process. And finally, it is the closing out phase where you close out the project. Okay. Again, hardly any memorization. I think the only thing which I can sort of remotely try to memorize is, okay, first I initiate, then I plan. And when I plan, I also plan the procurement. Then I execute. When I execute, I manage quality. I manage the knowledge. Then I monitor and control. When I monitor and control, there are two bits. I manage the KPIs as well, and I manage any changes. And then sort of I close out, right? And honestly, if you have done projects, this should be very, very intuitive to you, and there should not be any kind of mnemonics or any kind of rhyme and rhythm you want to find as part of this overall governance, because overall this seems quite logical that you initiate, then you plan, then you execute, then you monitor and control, and finally you close out. Okay. And if you sort of go through this video a few times and try to understand the logic and the flow of the steps happening from left to right, it is like quite intuitive. Okay. And it always follows that principle of you plan, then you manage, and then you monitor and control. So that way we have covered governance, we have covered scope, we have covered schedule, we have covered finance, stakeholders, and within stakeholders, mind that we have also covered communication. We have the resources section as well, which we have covered, and we have the risk section as well, okay, which we have talked about. Now, before we end this video, there is a very important nuance which I want to highlight to you, okay? So let's look at risk, for example. If you look at risk, As we have learned that we would be planning the risk first, okay, then we would be sort of identifying these risks, these 10 risks that has come, and then we perform the risk analysis, and then we plan the risk responses, right? It is very important for you to keep in mind that these steps happen in a finish to start relationship, okay? Very important. So you have to plan your risk management first, then you identify your risks, then you perform the risk analysis, and then you plan your risk responses. Then you implement, and then you monitor. Okay. So these 6 steps actually follow a finish to start relationship, and the PMP exam might test you on this, because what they will try to jump this finish to start relationship and sort of give you a scenario where, let's say, planning of the risk response is done, and it will ask you that, okay, what is the next step? Or let's say, what is the next best step for the project manager? Of course, after planning, you need to know that comes identification, because one of the wrong answer choices could be that after planning, they directly move you to implement, which is incorrect, right? Because there are still 3 steps left after planning, which is to identify, perform the risk analysis, which will help you categorize as high, medium, low, and then you plan the risk responses. So if you have to learn this out of this entire table, learn this finish to start relationships for a risk, which we will solve a question now as well. There is an important finish to start relationship which you need to learn. Similarly, for resources, again, another important finish to start relationship, that you plan your resources and then you estimate your resources. Okay. Similarly, for finance, you have plan your finance, estimate your cost, develop your budget. Again, that follows a finish to start relationship, that you plan your finances, you estimate your cost, and you develop your budget. Similarly, for scope, there is a finish to start relationship as well, where you plan your scope, then you collect your requirements, then you define your scope, and then you develop your scope structure. However, very important, there is no finish to start relationship across this governance process. Okay, and this is an important bit for you to remember, that for the governance process, there is no finish to start relationship. It is sort of follows the horizontal left to right, that of course you do these works in initiation, then do these works in planning, then do this work in executing, and then monitoring, controlling, followed by closing. However, there is no sort of finish to start that will be tested for governance perspective. Scope, yes, they will test you on the finish to start relationship of the elements of scope. So for example, here also you have to first monitor and control, and then you validate. That follows a finish to start relationship as well. Okay. They will test you on finance. So plan financial management, then you estimate and cost and develop budget. So one of the incorrect answer choices could be, after financial planning, they might ask you that, okay, what is the next step? And so if you don't understand what this finish to start relationship is, you might say that, oh, after planning, I will do develop budget. Okay, but it's really not the case, right? Because logically, as we have learned, that to develop budget, you need cost estimates, right? Otherwise, how will you know how much, let's say, per meter of concreting will cost? Or how will you know that how much per hour of development will need? So you have to estimate the costs, right? So that also follows a finish to start relationship. Next, with resources, again, there is a finish to start relationship, plan resource management, estimate resources, and very important for risk, this is quite critical, that you have these 4 activities which you need to learn, that this happens as a finish to start, and this will be tested as part of your overall PMP exam in terms of your scenarios or case studies. Okay, let's solve a quick question. Okay, so let's solve this question. So pause the video and try to solve the question first before we do this together. You should be able to do it now, since we have already learned the way PMP exam will be testing this sequencing frameworks as part of this 40 process groups. Right, so let's start. A railway construction project is in the planning stage, and the team has completed the probability impact assessment for the identified risks. What should the project manager do next? Now, if you go back to this chart, which we have just learned, the team has completed what? They have completed the probability impact assessment, right? So, what is probability impact assessment? You tell me. It is basically performing the risk analysis, right? Because this is what your probability impact assessment will give you, that 5 of your risks are high, 3 are medium. 2 are low. So basically what this question is sort of trying to say indirectly to you that look, we have completed the perform risk analysis step. What is the next step? Let me sort of change the color of my pen. What is the next step? So the next step is planning risk responses, right? So this is quite easy then, that you have performed the risk analysis. What is your next step? It is planning your risk responses. So the correct answer to this question is option A, planning risk responses. Implementing is incorrect because again, it has jumped the step, right? It has gone straight to here, which is incorrect. Rank the risks in order of priority, incorrect, because that is anyways part of your probability impact matrix calculation or assessment, which you have already done. Rank the risks in order of impact, that is also incorrect, right? So the correct answer to this question is option A. Now this might be an easy question, however is quite foundational for you to understand how these sequences will be tested as part of your PMP exam. Okay, so just to summarize what we have learned as part of this overall discussion, that firstly, from initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, it follows a proper left to right sequence, preferably a finish to start as well, that you first initiate, then you plan, then you execute, monitor and control, and then you sort of close out. We also learned that these performance domains, which are governance, scope, schedule, finance, stakeholders, resources, and risk, they do not fall through any kind of sequence, but these are like sort of intermingled as part of the project. And individually, we have also gone through the individual steps and sort of learned that all of it follows this plan, manage, and monitor and control. Especially for scope, you have to learn that these are the few sort of steps which you need to do as part of your scope planning. As part of your governance, you need to sort of learn that these are the steps which you need to sort of do as part of your governance activity. And most importantly, let's move on to risk. We have learned through an example that how these finish to start relationships will be tested as part of your PMP exam through scenarios. Now, if you go through this video a few times and sort of try to write this 40 process chart yourself in a blank piece of paper, just to understand how the logic and the reasoning flows across initiation, planning, monitoring and controlling, and closing, you should be in a much better position to sort of learn and memorize this overall chart in the fashion which the PMP exam wants you to learn. Okay. Now, please do not fret over memorizing all the 40 processes in sort of commit to memory, vomit to paper way. Okay, because that way it really doesn't help. Even if you are not able to sort of replicate that entire chart on a piece of paper, it is absolutely fine as long as you understand at least these blue bits which I have highlighted. You should be good to go, because then at least you know that yes, I have understood the key sequences that might be tested as part of the PMP exam as part of this overall 40 process chart. And at least you know that for any of these 7 performance domain, it follows the plan, manage, and monitor and control steps.
So that's the overall summary, right? Now, if you apply these same principles and reasoning to learn these 40 processes, not only you'll be able to memorize them efficiently, but also you'll be able to apply the same to solve case study or scenario questions in your PMP exam. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. Please press the like button and I'll see you in the next video.